Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the You Good Homie podcast. This is episode 15, where we talk about intergenerational trauma, which is a huge kind of overarching topic. But basically, we talk about some of the behaviors we inherited from our parents, some that we observe, some that are toxic or maybe good, that may have been passed down to us, and what trauma we're working on to not pass on to future generations. So, should be a good discussion, and hopefully, you guys kind of resonate with our thoughts and learn something. At around 1 hour 5 minutes to 1 hour 19 minutes of the podcast, we do talk about abuse and some of the root causes of abuse and what makes basically bad people bad. So if this is a sensitive topic for you, please skip past it and listen to the rest of the podcast. Other than that, please follow our socials on Instagram and TikTok, and hope you enjoy the episode.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
Okay, good. Turn this up. Down. So... Alright, Vince. Sorry, not Vince. Ronald, you can give us the clap of God and clock us in.
Okay, I got you. You ready, Lawrence?
Go.
I am.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of UGA.
I don't want to do this on this anymore.
Okay.
Today we're talking about daddy issues. Woo.
Or mommy issues.
Or
Yeah,
mommy
true,
issues.
you got it. Or they
They-
Them issues.
whatever you are, man.
I got mommy issues, low key.
Parent issues. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Low key, high key.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done an episode. This one's a little more okay. It's supposed to be serious, but we'll try our best, I guess.
What are you?
I feel like whenever we try to. So today's topic is intergenerational trauma. I feel like whenever we talk about this, like, I feel like for all three of us, our main way of coping is joking about it.
It's
so
humor,
much.
yeah.
It's humor.
I talk about this all the time. Where like I do feel like this generation has like really frowns upon humor because like, oh, it's not funny, but it's like, yo, humor is a great way to de-escalate sometimes. I'm saying that you can joke all the time, but like sometimes a few dick jokes here and there would doesn't hurt anyone.
Yeah.
You need to know the time and the place. I think.
Time and place. I think that's a great way of saying it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, so today we're talking about intergenerational trauma. We're gonna just talk about like I don't know our experiences. We're just gonna spitball.
Yeah.
This is kind of a new format where we still have guided questions, but wherever the conversation kind of goes, we'll just kind of go as it off.
And for our younger viewers, do we want to define what intergenerational trauma is? I think Jason, you probably are in the best position to
Oh, shit.
Probably
give
by
a
the
textbook
definition
definition.
Is when you're not good. Oh god, I actually didn't even think about this. I guess intergenerational trauma is like basically like a sociological influence based on the society that affected a demographic, and then that trauma that they got affected by the environment is now passing on to multiple generations.
Mhm.
So like if like let's say a group of people were to colonize like a group of just like X group, right?
Filipinos.
Sure, let's say that, and like let's say they adopted a like gambling and drug addiction problem, right? And like then that trauma leads to abusive behaviors, and that abusive behavior kind of goes on towards the next generation, right?
Yeah.
Because like I think we talked about it before, where it's like this is not any way to justify abuse, but a lot of times when people are abused, this is the probability of them becoming an abuser as well is a lot higher.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order to prevent that, a lot of times to fight abuse, it's more proactive than reactive. So intergenerational trauma is like a term coined to use to like describe that kind of like trauma that's going past in generations to generation to generation.
Right.
That's just the definition I usually go off of, but I'm pretty sure there's like a different way to explain it. But that's just kind of the language I use. But yeah, today we're gonna talk about intergenerational trauma. How's it affected us? We are men of melanin, as they call it. I know there's a different word. We're using people of color. I used to use the word minorities, but apparently that's offensive, so I can't use that anymore.
Yep.
But it's so fun.
I'm Filipino.
So I'm just gonna start off with some of the questions with spitball, and then we're just gonna go off that. So, what are some learned behaviors you have adopted from your parents? They can be good or bad. Just as something that like maybe like, oh, I noticed my dad does that, and I also do that. You guys have any like examples?
I don't know if this is. I feel like learned behaviors just in general.
Like porn addiction?
Okay, yo.
I feel like that's not really from our parents. I think like one positive. I think I'll go one positive, one negative, and then kind of talk about one. The one positive one that I think personally, it's a little bit toxic for myself, but one positive is like the way that I love and the way that I approach romance. I think is definitely a learned behavior.
Yeah.
Because of like I think growing up that my parents definitely had a very healthy relationship. Over sexualized at times.
Do you
Very
think
much like.
do you think you're over romanticized because you're a Cancer, not because it was a learned behavior?
Oh.
I'm kidding.
He's actually a Libra, ladies.
But yeah, no, like my parents were very like. I'm actually a Libra, ladies, but anyway,
Toxic.
Okay.
But anyways, I think I definitely did learn like the concept of romance and love from my parents, and like they kind of taught me like what it's like, especially from my dad. So like I was having this conversation with Lawrence actually earlier today. It's like me and you, like when it comes to like approaching women, or when it comes to approaching like just romance in general, we're very much the same. And I think it's because we learned it from our dad. We're very like big hopeless romantics, where it's like all these guys are like, oh, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But then me and Lawrence are like, yeah, but like once we have that one golden egg, we don't care about any of the other eggs. You know what I mean?
Such a Libra.
And I think that's mostly because of my dad, because of how hard he fell for my mom and how much he loves my mom, and like just kind of like their relationship and their dynamic. It's also like they were never afraid to show PDA in front of us. I think that's why we're like very hyperly invested in just like a romantic relationship in terms of that way. And that's just like behavior. I don't really think that's trauma. I think that's behavior.
Are you grateful for like being able to explore romance in that way? Because I know a lot of men don't really explore romance. Like, how do you feel about that?
I think like because of that, I'm a little bit more open to like just being a little bit more corny in a sense, like like what society quote unquote labels as corny, and a little bit more just like affectionate and a little bit more vulnerable. I think like I take pride in that, because like for some people it's really hard for them, and like I'm very grateful to my parents for being able to show me like that it's okay to be vulnerable, especially when it comes to like partners, and like it's not that hard in a sense, because they've shown it so often, and they've shown that it's fairly easy. And I've seen like it constantly. So I think like picture in my head, I'm just like, okay, I'm pretty familiar with this. So like I'm not too scared of like being vulnerable or being like quote unquote corny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah. I think a negative one is like I think this is with a lot of Asian people, is that like I'm afraid of authority figures, and I'm afraid of like just like I'm afraid, I think more or less not really afraid of authority figures. I'm afraid of failure. I think that's the big one for me. I'm very much like afraid of just like failing and not meeting like anyone's expectations. Like it doesn't matter if I don't know you, or it doesn't matter like if I've known you for like a little bit. Like I always want to try, like for me personally, I always want to try to meet your expectations, because especially my mom and my dad, they've always had high expectations, and they've always like expected that of me, and they've always like, you're not allowed to fail, because if you fail, like you're not worth anything. And they've never outright said it, but they've always implied it, and they've always felt it. Like a lot of my value came from academic success or athletic success, right? Like if I wasn't the best player on the team, my dad didn't care. If I wasn't like one of the smartest kids in my class, my mom didn't care.
You could feel it, yeah.
Right? Like you can feel it. And so like that's why I was very much afraid of failure. So like later on in life, when I would actually genuinely fail, because not everything in your life goes right.
Yeah, of course.
I would take it so hard. Like I would not have the right coping mechanisms, because I just wasn't used to that. You know what I mean? I wasn't used to like failing at an early life, and I wish like I was a lot more open to failing back then, so that I wouldn't be so, afraid now. Like, and I think that also leads into like my kind of like just being scared of authority figures, because it's like if I upset my boss, or if I upset this person, then like I'm obviously doing something wrong, and like I like should never like do it ever again. You know what I mean? And it's really bad, because sometimes they are in the wrong. Sometimes they are like, being irrational and stuff like that. And because they are human at the end of the day too. And it's just really, really scary for like me now being like, oh, like even trying to speak up and stand up for myself, knowing that they're wrong. but I'll still just kind of like push it to the side because I'm like, oh, like I don't want to upset the balance.
It's like a people pleasing problem, and I know a lot of immigrant kids have that issue of like that whole like people pleasing thing, because that's one of the things that I always criticize about like because like. And there's obviously like controversial debate of like should you hate your kids or not.
Yeah.
But like because the argument is that like yo you hate your kid and it's really well behaved, like they're not wrong, like your kid will be very obedient, not wrong, but it's usually out of fear.
Yeah.
And I noticed that like and this is something I kind of know it's not always true, but a lot of times I find that like white kids, they're very good at like asserting themselves, like they're like the Karens of the world, right? They're good at setting boundaries, but they're not really good at respecting it, I find. But with kids of color, they're good at respecting boundaries. We're not really good at setting it for themselves.
Yeah.
And I was like, I guess that's like the argument. Like, do you want your kid to listen to authority out of fear, or do you want your kid to listen out of respect, right? Because like, and again, like, of course, your morals and ethics depends on like the society you live in. Like, you know, I don't want to like push on anyone's buttons, but like personally, I would like not to beat the shit out of a kid.
Yeah.
Just because I'm like, yo, I just don't want them to go through the same experience of like, there's an adult, like, because I'm so used to like listening to my parents, and then there's an adult that's like telling them what to do, and the adult's always in the wrong, and they just listen to them because they're an adult figure. And it's like, yo, like yes, like you should respect your elders, but if your elder is a pedophile, would you respect him?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Exactly. The understanding of like, hey, yo, like adults make mistakes.
Yeah.
You don't always have to listen to that authority. Being okay with actually challenging what you're going through. Like what's this is like the authority figure that's bossing you around kind of thing.
And it's like, it's crazy too, because especially when you get to our age, you always forget that like we are adults as well, right? Like, we have grown to the point where we do have the perspective of our parents now for the most part, right? Because like at the end of the day, like yes, like 20 to 30 to 40 years of experience is a lot, but like also we are in our mid 20s now. We are like adults, and we all have experienced like a lot of things. So it's like it's almost irrational to really like, you know, still be afraid of like authority figures in that sense, because in a sense to other people we are authority figures, right? So it's like just having that dynamic is really damaging too, for especially for like a lot of immigrant kids. It's like definitely the debate of like should you beat your kids and all that stuff is really it is really controversial sometimes, but I do think that just I don't know, it's like just like addressing that trauma and not really putting your kids through that is like so important, because I think it makes them a lot more ambitious and a lot more assertive later on in life, but like also having that healthy way of like because like you don't want them to be like that white kid where they don't respect the boundary, right? Like having that healthy way of like,
sorry, white kids,
telling them how to like, I'm sorry for generalizing, but having the way to like to set that boundary, right? And it's like a healthy medium. And like I think especially with a lot of immigrant parents, it was either like survival or nothing, right? So it's like they don't really know balance, because they know that their way, the extreme way, is the right way, and they don't really know anything else.
It's a chaos.
I think it's like also if you like being parented that way, you don't really know what the difference between, as you said, like respect and fear is. So you just automatically say like, oh, like this person's older than me, like they got to be right. You kind of like gaslight yourself and say like, I know this is wrong, like I know what they're saying is wrong, I know what they're doing is wrong, but you know I can't say anything, or I'll be hit, or I'll be like yelled at or something,
or rejected from your community.
Exactly. So I'll just like keep quiet. And you know, I wonder what kind of effect that has on like, because if you're like a bit of a kind of like fearful child growing up, like not speaking up, like what kind of, I don't know, like I was kind of like that, but I kind of grew out of that shell, and like I kind of became more comfortable in like challenging my parents, my parents' view and stuff. And as an adult, I think I have like enough experience to do that. Not like disobey them, but you know, challenge them
like disagree, respect.
Yeah, but I wonder like those those kids who never grew out of that shell. Like I wonder what kind of adults that they'll be.
They probably live with regret. Like
because like there are some people that I personally know of that like still live like that, and they are like full grown adults. Like they're over the age of 18. Like not saying that 18 is like the cutoff date
Yeah.
to when you fully become an adult, but I think that
They're starting to become more independent.
around that age, like 17, 18, 19, even like your 20s, you should start having like a grasp of what it's like to be that kind of adult, you know what I mean? And to kind of have that level of maturity. And I feel like it's very damaging when it kind of bleeds for that long into that amount of time, you know what I mean? And I call it helicopter parenting,
Yeah.
right? And causing that much trauma because it affects them because they don't really know how to be like independent in a sense. And it's like a lot of the education that they should have had going through that period of time, like 17, 18, 19, 20, like really trying to be independent and really trying to look out for themselves, they don't really get it. And then they become reliant on like sometimes toxic dynamics, right? Like whether it be through friends, relationship, or work life, right? Like, and it's just very damaging, and it's very disheartening to see, you know, because it's like you don't want to see your friends go through that, but it's also at the same time like how do you tell them like, yo, you're being a little.
Yeah. I guess because like obviously I have a lot of experiences what comes with like analyzing the fuck out of myself, but also when I was creating the questions, I was actually talking to Karen about some of the things that she like adopted, and it kind of reminded me of a story of someone else that kind of had a similar like experience of adopting like behaviors from your parents. So I had a coworker from a previous job, and I'm still gonna keep it anonymous, but he's basically just talking about how much trust issues his dad had. Like his dad was so like, so what he used to do is that like I think it was like every like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday he'd put like a feather on top of the door, and like, you know, if the feather moved when he walked in, it means someone was inside the house. And like it was like literally and the thing is like this guy was Ugandan, right? So like he was always at risk of just dying. Like shit wasn't always going well, so he always was at risk. So he's always on like crisis mode, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that was one thing I noticed about the guy himself, that he himself also had like mad trust issues. That like a lot of times he would get upset with me because like I don't know, I would ask him to do like little things and he would think like I'm trying to sabotage him. And I also didn't appreciate it, but also can understand why, you know, like, he is the way he is. But at the same time, he was telling me a story about how like there was like a woman that was coming to like, you know, like, oh, like you abused my friend, right? And so he was like, what? Like I was home all day today and yesterday, right? And she was saying like, no, like you attacked my friend yesterday, right? And she was like, you know, accusing, right? And like come inside, like when he talked to like, you know, the authorities, whatever, but like there was no authorities. And like he looked outside and he saw there was a car with like 4 doors, and the back doors were open, right? And he was like, that doesn't make any sense, right? And so he refused to step outside, and like this woman was like, no, you gotta step outside, right? Like he's like, no, call the police, have them come over here, I'll be happy to explain, right? And like he was like even saying how like, oh, the landlords have cameras, like they can look into it, and like, and obviously that was his like his trust issues coming in, right? Where he just like did not trust this stranger he's never met, right? And then like when he talked to the landlord was like, oh yeah, like if you see the cameras, there's like 2 dudes like on the side of the door, like because she was like at the door and he was like right here, and the door had like bats on them.
Damn.
And so like one of the things he was like talking about is like, you know, like obviously the trust issues, you know, probably is pretty shitty because like it prevents you from really forming those intimate relationships, but at the same time, like he would have been dead if he wasn't in that crisis mode.
Yeah.
So one of the things like, you know, it is a little depressing where it's like, you know, like talking to this guy, like I would say like he's been through a lot, and a lot of times like this guy picks fights all the fucking time. Like this guy's like always just like mean, like he always thinks people are always out to get him, like, but at the same time, like it's one of those things where it's like, you know, he probably is like that because of what his father went through, right? And it's a little sad because like, you know, if you're someone who grew up in like a quote unquote third world country where, you know, things are not always, you know, like you can't, like we can just come home and like play League of Legends, like that's a privilege that we kind of have as people, right? So we don't really have to live in that crisis mode, but like our parents probably didn't have that luxury, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, for example, like my mother is very very inattentive with like cleanliness, right?
Yeah.
And at first growing up, I didn't understand. I was like, yo, just close my door. Like I was so upset. Then again, I have to understand that she was a woman growing up in Mexico, right? And so she had to be a good housewife, right?
Yeah.
So if she was dirty or neat, she's a bad woman. And obviously, like, and I'm not gonna go into my mother's story, but obviously, like, you know, she's very estranged to her family, right?
Yeah.
And you know, she left that environment. When things are messy, it bothers her a lot to the point where she's yelling and screaming, right? I don't appreciate it, and a lot of times, like, we get in arguments, and obviously, but then at the same time, I can understand why she believes the way she believes, right?
No, for sure.
And so, and even I noticed myself, like, you know, even with me and Karen, like I'm a lot more organized. But then again, like, because I know of what my mother went through, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna make sure I'm not projecting that on Karen. Like, even though I'm a lot more organized than her, there's no shade to Karen, you know, love her, but the girl sometimes messy sometimes. I will never judge her because I'm like, yo, like, I also realize that, like, I wish I could have let my room be messy for once. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I wish that, like, yo, like, I could just leave, like, literally a knife on the sink without it being a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know
for
what stuff.
sure.
So
No, I
and like,
understand that.
it's one of those things where it's like, you know, I could criticize my mom all I want, but at the end of the day, like, if I grew up in her shoes, in her situation, I
think
probably
I'd be
would have been the
Probably
same.
do the
Yeah,
same,
I'd be the
yeah.
same
You know
way.
what I mean?
what
And like,
mean?
and
Yeah.
again, like, this is kind of tying back into forgiveness and the trauma episodes we went into, but it's one of those things where it's like, yo, like, when you really analyze, like, you know, your parents, you kind of realize, like, holy shit, like, we are a product of this society that molds us, like, you know.
Yeah.
Or she's just a Cancer, you know, or a Libra.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a Taurus.
Yeah, but you, like, yeah, like, how do you guys feel about it? Like, do you guys have any like similar situations?
Yeah, my mom is the same way. Like, so my mom grew up in like the boonies in the Philippines. And I've been like me, Lawrence, Kayla have all been back to her place, and it's like, dude, it's a pig farm. It's a legitimate pig farm. Like I will tell the boonie story one time on the podcast, but now it's just not the time to tell the boonie story.
The boonie story. Or
but anyways, long story short, the boonie story is that I went back to my mom's back to my mom's like home in the Philippines, and she lives on like a legit like the ruralist areas of the Philippines. And so like we literally own a pig farm. And like seeing her home, like I understand why she's so clean, because it's like it's dirty everywhere there. Like she sleeps on the ground. There's no running water. Like there's not even like an actual bathroom. Like I was so traumatized going back there. Like so like when my mom is like trying to keep a clean like house and like stuff like that, she gets really angry. She wants all the dishes put away. She wants like this and that. She wants a room clean. Like I understand why, because it's like if you live in that kind of like filthy environment, you're going to be like kind of traumatized because of that. You know?
Yeah, and also like it doesn't help if people are like, you know, almost like slut shaming you for being dirty. You know?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like it's like when people are fucking making fun of you for being poor. You know what I mean? It traumatizes the hell out of you.
It's one of those things.
Yeah. My dad is like, I don't know. My dad is a little bit more different. I think. As of more recently, it's not necessarily like a bad thing, but I definitely find it very funny. So like my family is a very drug open family for the most part. Like we definitely all do partake in our share of like recreational activities.
Yeah, like Advil and stuff.
Yeah.
Tylenol, you know.
It's going on YouTube.
Multivitamins.
Put some gummies.
But yeah, flour. So we definitely partake in like a lot of flour, and I think because the main reason is because my dad was very, very open with it. Like, especially when I got into high school, he just started to become very open with it. My mom was like the complete opposite. She was super straight edge. Like she was just like, no drinking, no drugs, no nothing. Where my dad was like, yeah, I'll fucking become a day alcoholic and smoke all the weed all the time. And like, and I think that's the reason why my family is very, very open in terms of like that. Like we're a very, I guess, quote unquote drug friendly family, just because like of how open my dad was with it. And I think like that's also like that's kind of like a positive influence, quote unquote positive. But like it's cool to see like the environment that they create and how it affects like us going forward. So like myself, like I'm a very, very just like low key, like I'm kind of a slob sometimes. Like I just look into my room and it's just a fucking tornado, right? But then you kind of see like Lawrence and like Kayla, and they're a little bit more organized than I am. And I think it goes to show like how much of my mom rubs off on each of us, and like how much of our dad rubs off on each of us, and how like big of a quote unquote drug addicts we are. You know what I mean? So like it's definitely cool to see that behavior and those kind of things just kind of bleed into us. So we definitely learn from them for sure.
Well, the thing is, like, even because I just as a warning, like Ronald's not a drug addicted person.
No, I'm not.
But like, if you were, like, I think it would suck if your parents were to shame you, because like, that's one of the biggest things that people make mistakes of, is a lot of times when you look at people who are on drugs, they usually shame them.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, that's not helping. Like if you're trying to help someone with like an alcoholic problem, like
yeah. You don't shame them.
like calling them a sinner is not gonna help them. You know what I mean? Like,
Shame.
shame. Like yeah, but
Yeah.
Yeah, you try to understand like where it comes from, or maybe it comes from intergenerational trauma. I just recently learned like, how, this might be kind of factually incorrect, but in Calgary there's a stigma that a lot of the homeless population are natives.
Natives, right? Yeah.
And since I think June was Indigenous History Month or something,
Yes.
and at work we had a bunch of resources that you can read up on Indigenous history and what actually happened,
let's actually go talk about
and
that.
the legacy of like residential schools and stuff. We had a really interesting speaker who was actually his siblings went to residential schools, but he dodged it, or like he was able to
He's
not go. And yeah, he was just talking about like, these people who are on the streets right now who are like homeless, drug addicts, they didn't have parents that knew how to parent. Like they probably went to residential schools, or their parents went to residential schools, and coming out of that, all they knew how to do was survive. And they didn't have the luxury of having a house, or having a job, having an income, able to support a family. All they knew how to do was survive. So, and I think a lot of our parents, not to the same extent, but kind of have a similar story where they immigrated here, probably had to start from nothing because the immigration system kind of sucks, where international education is not as recognized, and they have to start from nothing. So all these like negative traits, like like tiger parenting, and like making like sure you have academic success, and like that's the most important thing, is a product of that. Like I think we talked about it in before episodes about like how they were just on survival mode.
Yeah.
And they didn't
I
have
think
the
maybe it was the first episode actually.
One of the
yeah,
first
maybe,
episodes.
but
for sure.
yeah, it's definitely has a factor in I think how like our parents came to be. And I think the challenge is like we have the luxury, or a lot of like the younger generation has the luxury of like learning about this stuff and not being in survival mode, and making sure like we do the best for like the future generations if we choose to have children. Making sure we learn from like the past and our parents and all the stuff that happened.
Definitely learning vicariously. Like I think that's a privilege that we have. Like it sucks that they had to go through what they had to go through, but it's through their suffering we learn vicariously.
Yeah.
And so we don't make the same mistakes, which is like a bittersweet kind of like
For sure.
Cool. So consider. Oh, I guess this is kind of the similar question, but we are people of melanin. Or people of color. I don't know. Like at this point, whatever semantic you want to use. Is there something that maybe you've noticed in a household that maybe you don't appreciate? That like maybe it affects your siblings as well. Like
Yep.
I can go with this one. Like, I think this has like been a common theme, and I'm sorry, family, but this is like a very, very common theme with us, is that we don't talk about our feelings, or we handle mental health very, very poorly. Yeah. So me and my sister, we suffer from like actual clinical depression. So like we've gone to a doctor, gotten diagnosed, and we've both taken medicine for it. And the thing is like it took us a very long time to come to the conclusion for both of us, because first of all, my dad didn't really understand the concept of mental health. Like he was just like, "Oh, are you sad? Like then just be happy." Like I don't understand. Yeah, like my
you have
dad,
a choice.
Yeah. Like my dad's like literal mantra of life is like, if you're sad, just smoke a bowl and then you'll be fine the next day, right? Like that's, and obviously if that's how he copes, then that's how he copes, right?
It's
and
like
with,
distraction.
Yeah. And then with my mom, she's just like, mental health doesn't exist because I don't believe it exists, right? and
it's like COVID.
Yeah,
It's not real.
yeah. It could, and
God.
like I've never really sat down and talked to her about it, like why she believes that, because honestly, like I just think that like she's just gone through so much like trauma in her life, and she's gone through so much hardship that she just doesn't realize that she's actually like damaged, and she has like a lot of mental health problems, and she just doesn't want to address it because she's like, yeah, I'm a totally normal person. If I'm not labeled as a normal person, I don't have value, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably what she thinks. Just because, you know, Filipino pride and stuff like that, right? Also, we're very prideful as people. I just don't fucking understand. But anyways, going back to that, I just think that, like, especially in my household, we just don't believe in mental health. Like, especially more so my parents, like, they just don't address it. Like, if we're like, oh, like, we went to the doctor and they said we have something called depression, they'll be like, okay, cool, like, just be happy then. I don't understand. Like, and it's just like a little bit more than that, right? Like, especially when my sister was kind of going through it and she was going to get help, and she really wanted my mom to be there with her in those sessions because like, you know, the therapist recommended that she come, and then like she worked with both of them so that they could kind of get through whatever problems they were going through. But my mom was like, oh, I don't need to go to like the therapist because I'm okay, like I'm not sick. And it's like, but you should be there for Kayla at the very least. You know what I mean?
But learn something about your daughter.
Yeah. But then she was like, oh, okay, well, if she's not healthy, then like she should just go to the doctor by herself. Like she doesn't need my help. Like the doctor's gonna fix her type stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's like it's a little bit different because you are part of the problem, right? So like you kind of have to like keep going through it.
And also helps her understand.
Understand
and mother.
the dynamic, right? So yeah, it's really hard for me to get my parents to come around to really understanding this whole mental health thing. I think my dad's a little bit more understanding now because he's like, I wonder why my kids are smoking so much weed now. And so like,
oh no, I fucked
up. Or like, oh, like why are my kids constantly going to a therapist? Maybe I should try to understand that, right?
Yeah.
And like not talking about our feelings. I think I talked about this in an earlier episode, but like the first time I ever saw my dad cry it wasn't until like my 20s. Like I wasn't until like super old, like till I saw my dad cry and actually talking about feelings, where he was like, yeah, I fucked up, Kuya, like this is what I did. And I was like, damn, like dad, like you're bawling. Like I've never seen you bawl in front of me like that before.
Damn, you did fucked up, bitch.
Yeah. Damn. It's like, damn, bro, like
you fucked up.
And it's like, I think that's like crazy because we just never, like me, I'm a very emotionally driven person, and so I'll always be very vulnerable with my friends. Like I won't be afraid to cry in front of them and stuff like that. But for like some of my siblings, like especially Lawrence, like I don't think I've ever seen him cry. Like I don't see him cry often. Like this guy sees him cry like a little bitch all the time. But I think that we like try to repress a lot of our feelings actively because we're just told not to talk about them.
Emotional suppression,
it's just like suck it up and be happy. You know what I mean? Like that's literally the motto of this house. It's like if you're sad, you suck it up and be happy. And that's it. Because like we're a normal family, we don't have problems. But the thing is, we do have problems. We just don't address them.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the concept of like not wanting to admit that there's something wrong.
Yeah,
it's very hard. And that's not even like a parent thing. It's like I've seen a lot of people do that to themselves. Like everything's okay.
Yeah.
You know, just the idea of like a vulnerability. Like you know, it makes you seem weak.
Yeah.
And whether that's a toxic masculinity thing or just a thing in general. Like I find that in any subgroup, I've noticed that just the idea of being vulnerable is very taboo.
Yeah. I feel like, I guess this leads into the next question, but like there's a lot of repression that goes on, especially definitely like my family or like any immigrant family. And if feelings ever do come out, it comes out as anger. Yeah. Like yelling and like fighting and like not physical fighting, but like like yelling and stuff. And I feel like it's kind of unhealthy because like you're probably supposed to be the first ones there for you, right? But oftentimes with some of these problems, you don't go to them first. Or that I guess like at least from my experience, like I don't have that relationship with my family that I go to them first. And that's kind of sad, but like at the same time it's what it's kind of like the relationship we've built, where it's kind of like, you know, we're here to provide for you, like in terms of like shelter and like food like and all the necessities and stuff, and then like you kind of like bring the money or whatever the fuck.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You get good.
But going back to the other question where it was like
I have it right here. So, have you ever struggled with repression? Talking about your feelings with
it's like common behavior. Oh, so common behaviors you notice in your household, yeah, like other than like repression and like all that stuff, like toxic Filipino culture is one that we put there. So one that I noticed is like, you know, is common. Like a lot of people know about this, but like when you feel like you can never like please your parents. So for example, if they call you fat, you lose weight, right? Like you lose weight and then like you go to the gym, you eat healthier, and then like, oh, you look so skinny now. Like you should gain some weight. I'm like, what the fuck?
Could be this
Like,
20 platter.
And 2 months ago you just called me fat. What the
Yeah,
fuck?
yeah.
And I'm just it's just like it's kind of frustrating because like what do you want me to do? Like and every little thing like if you get a bad haircut, they'll like roast you for like a fucking month or something.
So just to add on to this, like there's a little funny story. So recently, like I didn't start gaining weight for like until like the most recent like 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Like I actually gained a lot of weight during COVID. But before I used to be like super skinny, like a stick, and everyone was like,
Should have a
"Yo,
photo.
yeah, like just bam, this is skinny kuya, boom,
Pure energy, kuya.
pure energy kuya." And like my relatives would always tell me, "Oh, like Kuya, you're looking kind of thin. Like you should start
Actually,
eating more."
you
You
should
know what I
eat more.
mean? And I was like, no, I like being skinny. Like this is me. And like no, I'm like starving myself low key. And then like COVID happened, and like I just like combined with like metabolism slowing down. And
Doing less cardio, probably.
and doing less cardio and like not working out and eating fast food and like Serb is like kind of hitting fat. I started to gain a lot of weight. And then the same relatives were like, man, I miss the old kuya. Like I miss like
skinny.
I miss skinny kuya. And I'm like,
Skinny
what's-
legend.
Like you guys were literally telling me to gain weight. And then like I started losing weight again and like getting buff. And then they're like, and I started going in the gym and started gaining a little muscle. And then they're like, oh, like I still miss skinny kuya. And I'm like, I cannot please you people. Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong
Also,
with
that's
me?
a high school body. You will never, and I know a lot of people struggle with this with like the whole like body dysmorphia and shit. But
Yeah.
you will never get a high school body because you were underdeveloped. You're literally an
Legit.
underdeveloped human species. Like you're not gonna be that thin and that small because you're
No.
literally your balls haven't dropped.
Yeah.
Not actually, but you know.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that helicopter parenting thing where like anything you do is like scrutinized.
Yeah.
So you feel like what can I do that won't be like I know
You can cuss your parents out.
Fuck you.
I know this is big with my sister because she's like she's changed her hair color like twice in the past year.
Oh, that's like death for Filipinos, man. And they're like,
Yeah.
why you change your hair color so much? Are you a Barbie?
and
or some shit
like
that?
we're both considering like getting tattoos and we're like, oh, how are we gonna worry about
same,
it?
same.
No regrets.
Shit.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the same thing. Like I remember, I don't have my nose piercing in right now because it fell out. But when I first got my nose piercing, my mom was like, Kuya, you look so ugly. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like,
Love you
because
too,
I got a
Mom.
nose piercing. Like, and then I was like, you know what, Mom? I might get my eyebrow pierced. And she's like, I will disown you if you get an eyebrow piercing. And then like same thing when Lawrence came home with his like tattoo. Like we're gonna pop up a picture of Lawrence's tattoo right here. Bam.
The asshole sword.
Yeah.
Get in here.
Yeah.
Can I get some subs?
Yeah.
If you want subs,
Yeah.
Yo, just come in, man. Just come in.
Just come in. Just speak your story really quick.
So dead ass, like in the morning.
Speak it to the mic.
'cause I had
Sit your ass down.
I knew my tattoo was my appointment was like in the afternoon.
Did you get a tramp stamp? What was it?
Huh? I got this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
we'll pop a picture up of Lawrence's
Yeah.
actual tattoo.
And she was like, I was like, oh mom, how'd you feel if I got like a tattoo like along my forearm? She's like, oh, that'd be pretty nice. Like, is it gonna be big? And I was like, oh, yeah, she's thinking about that big. She's like, okay. I leave and I come back and she's like, mom, look, isn't this cool? And she's like, wow, I didn't think you'd do it. So I was like, what the fuck? Yeah, that's in my story. So
And you know what she told me after? She's like, I can't believe Lawrence would get a tattoo of a sword. Like what? Like this guy's so weird. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like,
bro, like once I it called? My dad has our birthdays on the back.
Yeah, I feel like as a parent, like I kind of would want to do the same thing where I would like roast my kids, but the thing is like it feels like they're being serious. Like
There's a difference
you know the
between
tone.
throwing shade and roasting.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Yeah,
Like,
and it feels like they're always just throwing shade without like, because also the thing is another like toxic trait about parents. I don't know if like you guys ever experienced it. They never apologize, bro.
oh, never.
But they show it in like different ways. Like for example, bringing you cut fruit or something.
They'll cook you
this-
food. They'll
the-
cook you food.
the
after
cook you
like,
food.
cry.
But
They'll never talk to you.
yeah, they'll never talk to you, bro. They'll just like throw shade and then expect you to like take it, right? But yeah, that's toxic Filipino culture. And like one more thing is like comparing children or like literally when people visit our house and like you know they're all civil and stuff, right? The moment they leave, oh, it's talk shit.
Yeah.
yeah,
Or your brother or your sister. I'm
yeah.
like, that's them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Or like, it's kind of crazy too, because you know, well, I've stated this before, especially in the relationship episode, that I am the most single out of like all of us. So, like at one point, my parents were like, because it's like if you don't date someone or like you just don't like see someone for a long
They
time,
think
they
you're
just
gay.
assume you turn gay. Like,
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah.
It was like literally like my parents are like Kuya, you hang out with the boys more than the girls. And I'm like, what's wrong with that? And my mom was like whispering, like as I'm going back downstairs into my room, like my mom's whispering to my sister, like, is Kuya gay? Like, is he dating Vince? Like I remember my mom asking me that. Yeah, she's like, is she dating Vince? And my dad's like, no, he's not dating Vince. Are you dating Vince, Kuya? Asked me, and I was like, no, Dad. He has a girlfriend, and I'm not gay. And then it's just like, she's like, okay, what about Ziad? And I'm like, he has a girlfriend too. Like,
Your dad was basically like, you get no bitches. That's what he told
literally.
you.
I was like, oh, brother.
That's.
But
I remember, like when my parents thought I was gay, because like when I got into dancing, and like was like,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
dancing,
that
bro. That's
too.
a whole nother.
Yeah,
podcast.
that didn't help a lot, because like,
man.
so it was kind of weird, because like, I mean, honestly, like you guys being Filipinos, like I'm pretty sure you all watched like America's Best Dance Crew, and you probably all like, got into. But like it was weird because my dad's side of family, they were into like boxing, basketball, really into soccer, like such a Hispanic thing.
Yeah.
And my mom's side, like they did gymnastics and like poetry and writing.
Mm-hmm.
No one was really into dancing. That wasn't really a thing. So I was definitely like, my mom was like, he likes dick, and like she obviously got like concerned, right? And I remember my mom like was like panicking, right? And honestly, like a lot of people might be like, oh, your mom's homophobic, like, like. Understand that she lived in a society where that was like taboo. Like it wasn't malicious. It was one of the things. Because I remember one of the things my mom got like asked me, and she like we got in a huge argument. She was like, I'm just worried about you. Like, what if like your friends like don't like accept you for being gay? And then I was like, well, fuck them then. Like, I would suck their dick and walk away. Like, and like and just keep in mind that like my family dynamic is a little different. Like we're very assertive. Like my mom is a very assertive woman, a very assertive like Latina woman. Like and you can stereotype her all you want, but if there was things that like she didn't agree with, she would really put her foot down. Like I remember at our church, and I can maybe understand that from the environment that she lived in, because like she was always being shamed, right? So nothing was enough to please people. So every time she was shamed, she would like call them out and make fun of them. So like when it comes to the whole like, because you guys probably had to deal with that. And like, if you were to call your uncle or your auntie about something, your parents would give you shit.
Yeah.
However, like if my mom saw me calling out my auntie and uncle, she would be upset, but she would also talk shit about my uncle and aunt.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah,
literally.
she like, and it was quite nice because that was one thing I very appreciated about my mom, that she knew that the society she was living was wrong and she didn't agree with it, right? So anyway, at church she got short hair. And like the woman in the church were just like, oh, that's not very womanly of you.
Yeah, to like have short hair.
Yeah, they were just like shaming her, and like my mom was obviously very sad about that, and I was like, oh fuck, but like she just called him out, like Anyway, like that whole assertiveness, I definitely have took into my life. So when it comes to like dealing with like relatives or like uncles or aunties who like have certain beliefs, like a lot of times I'm like not really scared to confront them. I become a white kid, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so there was this like friend who of like my dad, who was like, he's not really family, but like basically hosted. He was a pastor, right? and he got upset at me that I wasn't speaking Spanish to him, and like I just don't really practice my native tongue because like a lot of my friends are English speakers, and like a lot of times I just never had the chance to really practice Spanish, so obviously you lose it, right? And he was upset that I wouldn't speak. Like, I know you know Spanish. Like, I don't know Spanish, right? Like, you have to speak Spanish. You have to speak with my elder. And I told him to suck my dick. Uncle got very upset, right? But at the same time, after he left, like, it was like, you know, that dude was literally like, you know, talking shit about his wife. Like, you know, he wasn't the most kindest person, right? So obviously, like, when it comes to like those behaviors, like I noticed that assertiveness, and I can get very confrontational. I think I talked about in the past that like I'm not always happy about myself when I am like that.
Yeah.
But it has come, and I'm kind of answering all the questions as we go on, right? Where like I'm very comfortable confronting my parents like a white kid, if that makes sense. And like it's one of those things that has been a double-edged sword because like when I walk into Karen's family, like a Filipino household, like you know sometimes like if Karen watches, holy shit, sorry baby, but sometimes like you know her family would come in and like just do something very unreasonable. I was like, why don't you just cuss your mom out? Like, hey, but like then I understand that like if she does that, it's disrespectful and like it doesn't just affect the relation between them, but it affects the whole like dynamic, right? Like people don't have that choice to set boundaries, right? It's very easy to tell a motherfucker like, oh, like, you should set boundaries, you should be doing this, but like sometimes they don't have the environment that actually teaches that behavior. You know what I mean? And so it's one of those things where it's like instead of like being assertive, she would figure out ways to mediate conflict. And that was one thing I was like kind of learn, especially like my degree of like psychology, where the idea of like human beings adopt certain behaviors to adapt to the situation, right? Like for example, if a man was like hitting on a woman, right, and like the woman was like, and he would not stop, you would use an assertive behavior, and I would argue that's justified, like, you know, fuck off, like get away from me, right? And like, you know, the man would probably like, oh, you're a bitch or whatever, right? But like I was like, no, she's not in the wrong. Like I think she's in the right. But at the same time, like if you're entering an argument and you're just yelling at each other, like you're using that sort of behavior, but is that a behavior that's required to solve that conflict? And so like a lot of things you guys are saying, that something that I do relate, but I think one of the advantages I had, one of the privileges, is that because I was so used to being like a little more confrontational, like me and my mom were able to come to like a solution to handle things, right? Like obviously I'm very clean, not because like it bothers, like cleanse doesn't bother me, but because I adopted those habits to really make my mom happy. But at the same time, I kind of expected like, hey, like when you come out from work and you have a bad day, I don't appreciate you yelling at me, like you know. Literally. And so that was the agreement we made, where it's like I will clean the shit like after myself, but like I just like if I miss a day, which I will because my mental health is also sucks. Like I just need to be a little more understanding that like, hey, like I might have missed a day of cleaning the dishes because I was having a bad day, right? And like going forward, and that didn't happen in one night. That was like a constant argument that we constantly had all the time. And like eventually that was a conversation that we were actually able to solve. The thing is, I know that that's not a story that everyone can relate to. That's just something that like I had to I experienced because I was so used to just being like, no, this is not okay. I don't give a fuck. Nope, that's not acceptable, right? Yeah. And because the thing is, like, I don't appreciate a lot of times my mom is like, and like, you know, I don't want to antagonize her, but she would yell at the top of her lungs, like at the telenovela, like it's pretty, it gets pretty ugly. But at the same time, I can understand why she is the way she is, right? And I kind of wanted to like talk about that because about the next question, like, how much do you think you can do to break the cycle of intergenerational trauma? Because like, sure, it's like when you see those like those graphics where it's like, oh, like it's the grandparent yelling at the parent and the parent yelling at the child, right? And that's how it goes. But do you think you have enough social influence to influence your parents as well? Have you seen your parents improve as you get older, or they, you know?
I definitely think that it leading into to answer this next question, to like really, it's almost like sometimes you have to parent your parents sometimes when it comes to those things. And like I think I think me, my brother, and my sister just collectively have had a lot of success, like reteaching a lot of my parents about like kind of like more about first world problems, because they know all about third world problems. They know all about like how to meet their basic needs. But as soon as it comes to like
psychological
like needs and stuff like that, like how to be like like it's like the thing with my dad is like he every time he speaks, sometimes like especially before, like every time he speaks, he just came off as an asshole. Like he just like the way that he would speak, like the way that he would use his words, like obviously like we kind of like weave our way through social convention, and we can use flowery words or more harsher words, and say things in a way that we can kind of like communicate it a little bit better. Whereas like my dad is like this is the Filipino word. This Filipino word means this in English, so I'm just gonna use this word.
Mhm.
And it's like sometimes they'll just come across as very harsh, very like angry, very just And it's just and then sometimes I would have to be like, yo, dad, like
Language
don't
doesn't
say
roll like
that,
that.
you
Like,
know what I mean?
like for example, so
Yeah.
not to interrupt you, but like our word for Spanish, black sounds a lot like the N word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when,
yeah,
like
yeah.
when my dad was like speaking Spanish and it says the word black, I'm like, yo, I understand. Like in Mexico, I would say that's socially acceptable. You know, say it as you want, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I usually like yo, dad, just like careful when you say the word black in Spanish, because around here it just not the same. Because
Yeah.
they're gonna think that you're. But yeah, anyway, go on.
Obviously policing those like habits and like common behaviors, but also making them understand like the value of like mental health and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
when my sister's having a tough day, like I would have to go up to my dad and be like, yo, dad, like be a little bit nicer to her today, just because I know she's having a really, really shitty day.
Yeah.
Like, do not like just make her mad. And he's like, and then I have to like kind of explain, like, when mom's like kind of going through it, like you need to treat Kayla like that. And he's like, oh, why? And I'm like, because like she's just feeling this way. But he's like, but I treated her like that yesterday. And I'm like, well, like it's not just a day thing,
It's
Dad.
not
Like, it's a whole like
Ongoing.
week, month, like it's an ongoing thing. So like, don't bring up things like she's very sensitive about. And then he's like, but he'll be like, but like it's bothering me. Like I want to bring it up, but I'm like,
It's not about you.
Don't.
It's not about
I can
you.
totally see him.
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember one time, my mom. So when like I think as of like this year, their relationship's gone a lot better. My mom and my sister, but like the last couple years, like teenage angst kind of takes over,
Yeah.
and like it gets rocky. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you argue with your parents a lot. Oh, also, side note, it just came back to me. I do think that teenage angst is very important. Like, it's an essential stage for kind of teenagers to go through kind of the rebellious phase. And
It's a
like,
biological
you
thing.
know,
Like
yeah.
a lot of teenagers have that. It's like they start to have a challenge authority. Like it's a
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
normal human
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And so like a lot of people say like, oh, my kids can be obedient, but the thing is like you're just delaying it
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
like no matter how you raise your kid will challenge you.
Yeah.
No matter what your
Yeah,
stance
yeah,
is,
yeah.
right?
So I think it's like easier to do it like in the teenage years because they kind of get it all out of their system, and then they become like better, well-functioning adults because they know what it's like to challenge authority. They know what it's like to kind of like be more assertive and stand up for themselves. Whereas like if you do it in like your 20s, 21, 22, like in your mid-20s,
It's a lot harder.
it's a lot harder because like that's when the real life shit happens. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So like if
Exactly.
you do it now when it's like, oh, like I just want to go out and like party, like I just want to go see my friends, it's a little less damaging than, oh, like something serious about your job or something serious about like a relationship, and that doesn't have as much magnitude for your future, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's
But yeah, that's my thing on teenage angst. Like I just really want to state like a lot of Asian parents just don't understand teenage angst, and they don't understand like the rebellious phase. They're just like, no, cut that shit out. And it's like,
they'll beat it out of you.
yeah, like it's just very
No, for
important
real,
for real.
Yeah, it's just very important to go through that so that you kind of like develop a little bit better later on. And I think that's also part of intergenerational trauma, like suppressing like almost biological things that like need to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're learning to stand up for themselves, which like is a very normal thing because like I'm all about like helping one another, but at the same time, I think everyone should have that self-sufficiency of being able to stand up for themselves here and there, at least in some kind of capacity.
Yeah.
And if you like suppress that from a child, like you fuck him up. Like, again, we're talking about with the bosses and authority figures. Like when like you go to another like authority figure, like you tend to for a kid who was like silenced as a kid, they're obedient, they're a well-behaved kid. But now when they're with their adults and like with like bosses or anything, if their boss is being an asshole, they just take it.
They just take
Yeah.
it.
Just take it.
And going back to that, actually, like challenging authority figures, and if you're at your job, for example, and you don't know what you're worth, right? Because your boss says, okay, you're gonna get paid this, you're gonna get these hours, you're gonna do this work,
And these nuts.
and, and you're gonna get these nuts,
And you hold this.
and then like that person's gonna be like, oh, but I don't really like doing this work, or I deserve to get paid more or something, but they're afraid to go to their boss to say like, hey, this is what I deserve. If
Pay
you don't
attention to
get-
your white friends. They're really good at just like, nah, I'm
Yeah.
not accepting that. Like,
Yeah, because
No, actually.
because that could really hold you back, right? Like if you really feel like you deserve a promotion, or you deserve like more pay, or you deserve like your fucking more vacation, or like more hours if you want to work more, and your boss not giving that to you, but you're just accepting it because you're afraid of an authority figure like cracking down on you, then you're not really gonna be advancing in life as much as you potentially could,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
you never went through that challenging authority phase.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think a lot of parents, I don't know if it comes from like insecurities, or like something about oh my
elder culture. And
my kids are not like being obedient, like
Oh, shit.
am I doing something wrong as a parent? No, it's just something that kids have to go through, like
Mhm,
something
exactly.
kids have to learn.
No,
And-
of course.
yeah.
But yeah, that was a good like tangent on teenage angst. But anyways, back to the story. So my mom and my sister just had a rocky relationship. They would always argue and stuff like that. My sister was going through teenage angst, and my dad would always be like, I'd always have to like be like, Dad, like don't bring it up, like don't ask Kayla, like it's only been like 2 hours, like don't ask her about it, because like before, like when I wasn't home, he'd go upstairs and be like, what the hell was that, Kayla? And then she'd start yelling at him, and then they'd start yelling. Then my dad would start yelling at Kayla, and then like it just gets even worse. And like, and I'm like, Dad, like it doesn't matter. Like I know you can get over it in like an hour, but Kayla's just going through something. Like she's literally like having mental problems. And he's like, oh, do we need to take her to a doctor? And I'm like, yeah, like if she needs it, but like also at the same time, like give her space,
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, like how much time do I need to give her? And I'm like,
You gotta feel it out, bro.
I'm like, Dad, like
He puts a timer on.
yeah, like this
All right,
guy
so I'm waiting.
like I was like, you know what, like just leave her alone. And he's like, but I want to talk to her. And I'm like, okay, but like wait, like if you want to talk to her, just don't talk to her about
It's
it.
not
But,
about
like,
you. Yeah.
yeah, but he's
Yeah.
like, I want to talk to her about it. And I'm like,
I wanna
then
fix it.
don't, please. Yeah,
That's the thing.
exactly.
And I think a lot, and that's something that kind of also I think I feel like I don't know if you guys have this idea of like trying to fix a
Yeah.
problem right away.
Yeah,
But sometimes and something that was it Karen was something about like a friend group yesterday, like or like her friend sometimes does this too. So it's not just me, but like what I would do is like if someone having a problem, I'm like, oh, like let's talk about it, and they don't want to talk about it, but I'm like pressuring them, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes like they are so exhausted from having to experience it that they don't want to unload what they're going through. Sometimes
Yeah.
they do need a distraction. Like of course, like you don't always just distract yourself from your problems, but there's times where it's like, yo, like it's too exhausting to have to like fix things going on because it's so unbearable. Like I just need a time where it's just a pause,
Yeah.
like where it's not always like something to be fixed. Like sometimes you just need to hang out with some friends, or sometimes you really maybe need to be left alone. Like whatever you need. Like it doesn't always have to be like a problem solving thing.
Yeah. And it's like going back to the question of like breaking that cycle of intergenerational trauma. Like I know, like knowing that like how my parents treated me, I would never, like I always tell myself like I would never treat my kids like that. You know what I mean? Oh, in a sense of like mental health. Like I think my parents did instill a lot of like good values in me for my future parenting skills, but I also know like what I really didn't like and how it felt when they treated me like that. And I think that's also very important. But one of the biggest things is like when I would parent my parents is like one day I realized like, man, I'm actually like low key kind of lecturing my parents on some of this stuff that like we're talking about, like especially like mental health, or like especially like the biggest one is like how to deal with like what my sister's going through, or what I'm going through, or what Lawrence is going through sometimes, and how to explain it to them in a little bit more digestible, and like being able to like sit down and be like, okay, this is what you did wrong and this is what you need to do. But then they'll be like, oh, but like that's not the way I did it. But I'm like, did it get better? Right?
Yeah.
Like if you do it my way, it's gonna get better.
Yeah.
And I just know because I understand it a little bit better than you do. And sometimes like they just don't understand that like there are some topics that like you understand a lot more, like especially when it comes to like modern science. Man, my mom just reads something on Yahoo and she's like, yeah, dude, this is true. And I'm
Facebook?
like, no, it's not.
The
Like,
Facebook
stop.
doctors.
Oh,
Trust me.
9 out of 10 dentists say that
Yeah.
this is bad.
Rub this
Yeah.
ointment on your skin to cure COVID.
Vicks vapor rub and ginger ale will cure all your
Yeah.
sickness.
Yeah. Like my mama, like what's funny is that like so my brother's in finance and he knows a lot about stocks and stuff like that. He's just a lot more knowledgeable in general. And my mom and my brother were having a conversation one time, and my mom was trying to give my brother financial advice,
Oh.
like about like what stocks to invest in. And my brother's like, no, mom, like that's wrong. And she's like, no, like it's right. Like I read it. Like and my brother's like, did you do the research? And she's like, no, but like I know it's right.
I know it's
He told me.
Was it yo Lawrence, was it Bicone?
I think that's thing about science that like, and I even find young generations also do this as well. Where like, and this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but like,
Yeah.
if you have one article that has one implication, you have to look at contradicting implications as well to really make
Yeah.
an inclusion of
Mhm.
what is true and what is fact.
Right.
That's what a science is. Like Newton's law it's not Newton's theory, it became Newton's law because it was tested so many times that there was
Proven
no
right.
thing to prove it wrong. Like
Yeah.
that's the reason why it became Newton's law.
Yeah.
Like again, and like when it comes to theories and stuff like that, and like implications, like for example, this is like a more of a soft example of how to with science, and this is for people who are watching who are science nerds. But for example, let's say there's a correlation between a messy room and someone with depression, right? You may say like, oh, having a messy room leads to depression, or you could say someone who has mental health problems has less energy throughout the day, and with that less energy, they're less likely to take care of other things in their life, such as their room, right?
Yeah.
Right? Just because something is correlated doesn't necessarily mean it's correlated in the way you think it is, and I think that's like when I deal with like science versions of that, bro. Like, oh, it's fact. Like, yo, like if you're a person of science, you always have to be critical about how you analyze data. Like, but the reason why I'm talking about science is because I'm gonna talk about quantitative study like right after, but I just wanted to get your guys' opinion of like how much power do you think you can influence your parents? Like, do you think you have enough like tools in your life that you're able to like change your parents for the better, or do you think like they're just the way they are?
I think for me, like it's important to also, while I agree with Ronald's, like on some topics you can like reparent your parents, but it's also important to as I kind of touched on before, have compassion for them as well and have empathy for them, because realize that they grew up in a different time, in a different like part of the world, where a lot of the stuff that we think might be like the norm or might be wrong, was perfectly fine for them back then, or like their style of parenting was perfectly acceptable back then, and they just learned from their parents. And like how I see is like instead of being mad at them for being like, oh yeah, they don't they don't support me in the way that I want to, like for example, if I didn't get to go into dance or something, like I really hate my parents for not letting me go into dance.
That's a luxury to them. Like,
yeah, exactly.
that's a luxury.
It's like they in their mind they probably don't think like, oh, like this is such a waste of time, like like what do you need to do to survive? And they probably think that these recreational activities like might be a waste of time.
They don't produce
right?
results.
So having that compassion, understanding where they're coming from, and also like understanding that they're also probably suffering from intergenerational trauma themselves, and each generation can only do so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, maybe they from their parents, they were really poor, right? They were really poor. They grew up in a really poor province or area of the world, and one thing that they want to give to their children is financial stability. So they move to Canada or US or something like for the future of their children.
Africa.
But the implication of that is that they want their children to succeed so bad that they kind of like set out a path for their children, and then they're like, no, you got to stick here. You can't express yourself, and they like instill a really great deal of discipline into their children, and like not enough like expression, so that their children grow up like really repressed. So that's like fixing one part of intergenerational trauma, but also introducing another one or making another piece worse. So I think our generation, the biggest impact we can do, other than like reparenting our parents on a lot of like the social aspects of our like current generation, is also like realize our limitations as well, and learn from what our parents did that we didn't like, but also like realize that we can't provide our potential future children with everything. Like they're not gonna have a perfect life, and that's okay. Like
Yeah.
sometimes our children are gonna hate us for stuff that we do,
Yeah.
and
It's out
that's
of your
okay.
control.
And
like
it's
being
out of your
cringe.
control. Like you don't know what your child is gonna feel
Yeah.
at every moment, every
I
time.
didn't
They
buy an
can't-
iPad 69. Fuck my dad.
they can't you can't make them like not hate you or not love you or love you or hate you, like, right, so stuff
Yeah.
like that. So like
Yeah.
I feel like going into this stage of our life where we're thinking of potentially having children or adopting or whatever, like you might be thinking, if you want to start a family, like just realize your limitations, and just try your best, because it's probably gonna happen that your children are gonna hate you for something, or experience some form of intergenerational trauma that you may have passed on from, or like you may have inherited from your parents, that you're still kind of passing on to future generations. And it's kind of like, I'm not saying that intergenerational trauma can't be broken, but it can only be broken
One step at a time.
slowly, and it's like it can only be improved on generation by generation. Like there's
Yeah,
not
for
one
sure, for
generation
sure.
like there's gonna be like, yes, this is me, super Mr. Channel. I'm
Yes.
gonna solve all of
The social
Solving
issues.
world hunger.
I'm gonna redeem my family's name and break
Bring
the
on-
cycle. No, it's not like that. So you just gotta be like, yeah.
Accepting how things are and like realize that there's only so much
Exactly.
you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually something I wanted to talk about because this was actually a YouTube video I ran into because I'm a big fan of like Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm gonna give credit to this guy, but basically the YouTube video is called "The Brilliance of Zuko's Story: The Element That Truly Elevated Avatar: The Last Airbender." So it's about, and if you ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, you probably
Goated show. I love
go to
it.
show talks about redemption and idea of like abuse from like Zuko, who's a kid who went through
Yeah.
abuse, right? And if you really look at it, it's a very touchy subject. So he actually pulled out a study in this YouTube video, or it's more of ethnography. So it's a book called Ordinary Men, and this actually I mentioned it in a previous episode about the idea of like, and he asked the question like, if you were born in the 1920s, during like Hitler's time, like where everyone thought the same, everyone believed Jews were bad people, right? Would you honestly believe that you would have made the right choice? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Would you
Yeah.
have like
It's a tough question.
joined the other side and fought for freedom and like fought against oppression, right? Are you a good person because you chose to be a good person, or are you a good person because society molded you and you're at the mercy of the social forces that made you who you were?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's a very hard question to answer, which like I just think is very like, very, very good to answer. Because one of the things I kind of ask myself, because like when I read about statistics about like abuse and like, trauma, there's a very high statistics, and this is something I learned like in my psych class. Where a lot of Latin American and Black men tend to have high criminal rates, right, and high abuse rates, right. And I could easily been that statistic. Like one of the things I kind of ask myself, and this is like a question that might be hard for someone to ask themselves, where it's like if I didn't go to the nonprofits that I worked at, if I didn't work at like Antics, or like if I didn't like meet Karen or meet like other people, like would I have become an abuser? Would I have been? Am I a good person because I chose to be a good person, or am I a good person because I had actual influence from people that allowed me to be a good person?
Yeah.
Again, this is like we'll put a trigger warning before this, right? And if you want to like cut this out, we can if it's too much. But that's a question that like I kind of ask because this is something that like I want to bring up with like, and also if you ever say like psychopaths, a lot of times that and like if you ever study psychopaths, like even like people like the Golden State Killer, like people who have killed like millions of people.
Yeah.
When you go into a backstory, you find out like, oh, like they themselves are also abused as a child, right? And again, I know in the past episode I talked about like, do you think these people have chance for redemption? We answered no, right? I asked that for a reason, not because I actually believe that they have a chance for redemption. I'm actually on the same boat. I don't think. I think they're a lost cause, but just to understand why someone becomes an abuser in the first place.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about intergenerational trauma, there are some parents that I've met or like overbearing mother that's very narcissistic, right? Some of these kids like obviously had like parents that were abusive, not because they chose to be abusive, because they lived in an environment that was not allowed to be good people. Again, whether you decide to forgive your parents or not, that's entirely up to you. But for example, like you can look at like we're talking about residential schools, right? You look at a Native American who maybe has a drug addiction, right? Who's abusing his family, and say fuck abusers, fuck him, right?
Yeah.
But also ask yourself, if residential schools weren't a thing, do we think that he would have been a bad person?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right? You can look at Hitler and be like, and if you went back in time and had a gun and you go back in time and meet Hitler as an adult, you probably would shoot him for the greater good.
Yeah.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
you met him as a baby, would you shoot the baby or would you take the baby, put him in a household
Yeah.
that believes in unconditional love thy neighbor, help one another, right?
Yeah.
Are you a bad person because you chose to be a bad person, or are you a bad person because you're put in an environment
Yeah.
that made you bad?
Yeah,
right?
essentially, how much like
Yeah.
does each factor have an influence? I feel like that societal factor. I feel like it's like 80-20 or 90-10 in favor of the societal factor, because
Yeah,
like
yeah.
no one is born like no one is born
a shitty person.
no one is born a shitty person, I believe.
Oh,
Like
100%.
like there's probably like
I'm with you on
1
that.
in 1 million that's kind of like
Yeah, like
They're
just wakes,
respecting that.
that just wakes up and it's like, I'm gonna be a demon.
Because he's a Scorpio.
Yeah.
hey, I'm a Scorpio. They're a menace to society. But yeah, like I feel like that's a very interesting question, because like, you know, like with Hitler again, like if he was, you know,
Not
grew
to
up in a-
empathize and not to like
No, yeah,
justify his
exactly,
actions.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, we should probably specify we're not trying to.
insert like bad person here. Like
Yeah.
if they were like raised in a quote unquote good household and provided with a healthy childhood, like loving parents and stuff, like would they have turned out to be bad, or you know, like would they have turned out to be like a decent human
Yeah.
being?
Yeah.
And probably like that, like what I'm saying is you know, and going back to that question where if you're back in the in Nazi Germany, I feel like I saw that video too. Like the majority of people would probably be on the Nazi side, because like that was
That was the
the
society.
societal
Yeah.
acceptance at that point.
Yeah.
You know,
That's the morals that they were taught.
Yeah,
That what
yeah,
was morally
yeah.
right.
yeah, exactly. And even now, like some of our beliefs may be
Our
challenged,
little
like-
feud, yeah, or challenged,
like
yeah.
further into the future, and be like, what were they like? What were
Yeah.
they thinking?
What
and
were
stuff like
these guys thinking?
You
Yeah.
could easily judge them, but also understand that like if you were in their shoes, not to like again not just as a behavior, but you probably would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah,
Like
Yeah.
exactly.
And I like to add on, like I think there's a little bit of a less extreme example, because obviously this is still a very good example. I think a little bit of a less extreme example that I kind of thought of was people having mommy and daddy issues. You know, it's not necessarily a product of like, oh, like they just woke up and they're like, oh, like I have mommy issues. Like I genuinely look, especially at my own kind of like family nucleus and like look at a lot of like my cousins who kind of like I look at their uncle and I'm like, damn, he's really not in her life, and that's why she's like, yeah, I have daddy issues, and I'm like, I get it, because you didn't really have a father figure in your life, so you go out into like you go out into the world and have like these platonic or romantic relationships where you put too much value into these men
Mhm.
who just don't necessarily treat you very well, right? And
love wasn't modeled
Yeah.
like in a healthy way, so
Yeah,
you don't
yeah,
know
yeah.
what a healthy
yeah,
relationship
yeah,
is.
healthy
Yeah.
relationship is, right? And it's the same thing with me. Like I definitely 100% have mommy issues, but that's just because I just never knew what it was like to have like a loving, caring like mother figure, because my mom was always like that stoic kind of person who just never really showed that type of stuff. So it's like I put too much value into just like just into my more feminine relationships, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, and I think it's very much due to the environment. Like you can't, like, yes, it's fucking shitty to see like an abuser abuse and like and them do that stuff, but you also kind of have to realize like they weren't born that way. They learned that through like lived
Yeah.
experiences and through like societal through what society has pretty much given them,
Mhm.
essentially, right? Like you can't make lemonade without lemons,
Yeah.
essentially, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead. Actually, you
And
finish.
yeah, and I think like the first step to healing, whether it be like intergenerational trauma or helping an abuser like rehabilitate or something else, is recognizing that it's not the person. It's like
It's a behavior.
it's not it's
Mhm.
not usually the person itself that like is bad. It's, you know, the environment that they grew up around, and going like a layer above and say, okay, this person is bad because they're not a bad person, but because maybe they got abused, maybe they grew up without a father figure or mother figure, maybe they didn't grow up with any parents at all, maybe
Yeah.
their parents were absent for a lot of their life, you know, maybe they're the type of friends that we're hanging out with. So it's kind of like I know it's like a challenge to kind of
Except that-
analyze every person, and it's easier to just say,
Yeah.
oh, they're an asshole. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not. I don't like them. I'm not talking to them
Yeah.
anymore. Instead of having like instead of doing that analysis, saying like, yeah, I can empathize with this person because they didn't grow up in the best environment. They didn't have
Mhm.
like love modeled for them. They didn't have all these things, and this is
Mhm.
why they're this. And
Yeah.
maybe I can help them
Mhm.
be better by helping them like realize this. Or
because one of the things I know we said in an early podcast where it's like it's not your job to fix someone and you don't owe anyone anything.
Yeah.
Which like I as I get older, I start to rephrase that question where it's like, do I have the capacity to help someone?
To help someone.
Right? Because like if you're someone who's in an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
you don't have the capacity. Get out, sister. It's not your job to fix them. I would
Yeah.
100% be on that boat.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
if you're someone with a lot of emotional intelligence, maybe you're someone who studies like society, like heteronormative, like the patriarchy and all that shit, like
Yeah.
everything, like you're very
You just,
knowledgeable.
you just have a lot of resources.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have emotional wealth, right? And you
Yeah.
have a chance to give back. Knowledge is power, and with great power comes great responsibility. If you want the world to be a better place, would you make that choice? Like for example, like again, would you kill baby Hitler or would you put him in an environment? Obviously, we can't go back in time.
Yeah.
We can't control the past, but we can control the present,
Mhm.
right? Because we say this a lot. We're like, yeah, it's not our job. It's not, you don't owe anyone anything. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, whatever. And that's obviously like that is somewhat true. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like, if you want the world to be a better place, you also have some agency. This is something that I was talking with Karen. She kind of threw in the term dichotomy. And so the loose definition was like society, norms, create human agency, so human choice. And that human's choice creates society,
Mhm.
right? So we were very privileged that we weren't evil people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm not talking about male privilege. I'm talking about like white privilege, whatever. Like this is a different type of privilege. We were very privileged to live in a country that taught us morals and ethics.
Mhm.
Like for example, in Mayan culture, they used to believe in human sacrifice for the
Yeah.
god, and so they would just kill the fuck out of people
Yeah.
for the sake of the god. And
Yeah.
like it's very easy for you to be like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. Like I'm such a good person. I'm morally a good person, but keep in mind, moral and ethics is a learned behavior. Like, are you liberal because you chose to be liberal? Are you conservative because you chose to be conservative? Is that woman toxic because she chose to be toxic? Is that man trash because he's just naturally a trash person?
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of those things where it's like, yes, like I think it's very good to understand like behaviors, understand like, oh, this person's kind of shitty, and like, and sometimes you might be like, oh, you know what, maybe just a shitty person, and just accepting that as it is. But also understand that like you are definitely molded by the environment around you, and sometimes it can go extreme because like, and just remembering that you also have the capacity to be an evil person, right? This is something that I talk about when it comes to like in terms of forgiveness, and I'm not talking about abuse. I'm talking about like just relating this back to intergenerational trauma, right?
Mhm.
Talking about that Native American that was probably had a gambling addiction and was into drugs and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yes, it's very easy to point fingers and be like, that's a bad person. That's what a bad person looks like. But also understanding at the same time another truth of like they could have been different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Again, this is not to empathize with abuse, not just to like justify their behaviors, but just to understand why abuse happens in the first place. Abuse is to prevent abuse. It's proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
Like how like a lot of like left wing people are like all cops are bad. Like cops don't prevent crime; they just show what happens, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, I feel like that's the same thing with like trauma and abuse, where it's like we tend to point fingers at the abuse, but we don't really know how to solve the issue.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Again, like this is a very touchy subject because the reason why I want to talk about it is because this is abuse, and I've met a lot of like immigrant kids who have a very overbearing narcissistic mother or like a misogynistic father, right?
Mhm.
You might have a racist uncle or transphobic aunt, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also understanding, and you don't have to accept and forgive them, but you also have to like I would recommend understanding that they weren't born that way.
Mhm.
That was
Mhm.
something that they were molded by the
They
society
learned,
you are.
yeah.
And you yourself are also molded with certain ethics and ideologies.
Yeah.
You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like you are definitely molded by the society around you. So
Yeah.
like sometimes finding what is right and morally wrong might be hard for people. Like what does it mean to be a righteous person? What does it mean to be
Yeah.
a good person? Again, this is something I just want to talk about because like this is like the complex issue of intergenerational trauma of like, a colonizer coming in and like assaulting our woman, giving us like no resources, giving us drug addiction and poor mental health, and that passes on, right?
Mhm.
Of course, there are some people that we can argue that have no chance of redemption, and maybe they're a lost cause. You know, I definitely think that's something we can accept. It. Like, there's some people that just never change. However, going forward, do you think you can prevent someone from becoming that person so that you never have to ask that question in the first place?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's why I asked the question, like, do you think you have the power to change your parents for the betterment, for good?
I think like since our parents they're getting older, I feel like the best thing we can do for them is educate them first of all, like what is what does society consider right, quote unquote, now, like, and they don't have to accept it, but they can still kind of like make their own decision, right? And like also discuss like what you feel as an individual, as their child, like what do you feel is correct, like this is where we have differences, and you can make your own decision. I'm not saying like you have to feel this way or you're in the wrong or you're a bad person, right? But yeah, going back to that thing where like realizing they came from a different time. Like, I know my parents always like make kind of like sly like little like like homophobic and like
Yeah,
racist remarks here and there, and
yeah.
they seem innocent, right? But me and my sister are always like, hey, you can't say that because
It's like chill.
yeah, because like they're the slurs that you're referring to, like, they're talking about like these people who are marginalized because of this, and this is their trauma as well, and
Yeah.
like all that, and they kind of
Yeah.
they understand too, because like
Yeah.
they came from a very Filipinos are like very Americanized,
Oh yeah, no.
and all
Yeah.
that.
Apart from colonization,
yeah,
too.
it's like trauma from colonization coming down, like filtering down throughout the generations and stuff. And they don't really understand like what other cultures have been through. And I think that's like one of the single most important lessons that we can, I guess, not pass on, but pass up to our parents, and is like, hey, this is the history of the world. This is like what other people are going through. And like, just because like we didn't experience it doesn't mean it's correct that we kind of like, make fun, or get to say these like derogatory remarks just because they're different, or like yeah, whenever you're talking about like another culture and stuff, not even like just racism, because I know like gays in the Philippines, being a very Catholic country, they're not always like seen in the
Super
best
accepted.
light, right?
Yeah.
Like,
They're sinners. As
they're sinners. They're portrayed well on like on media, but once you have like a gay person in your family, there's always shade.
It's shame.
Yeah, it's shamed. Yeah, because like, you're like, how are you gonna get married? Like, how are you gonna have kids? Or
like even
that.
talking about like earlier when we were talking about like, oh, like my parents were so like worried that I was gay, and like
my mom was
like,
too. Yeah.
So like what's the problem, like if I end up liking like penis, like
Because I was bothered by that. I was like, I'm gonna suck dick out of spite. Like, fuck.
Like it's not like, it's not a bad thing for sure. It's just like, even I even had to like really like tell my dad, like, Dad, like, if like any one of us turns out to be homosexual, like it's an okay thing, like it's not a bad thing, Dad. And he's like, it's like, no, but you're my son. And I'm like, yes, I will always be your son, gay or not. Like
Fox.
So it's just like there's still that taboo that you're really trying to break with them, and those like intergenerational habits. Like, and what's crazy is that like a lot of us know that we, like, some of us know that we have a gay family member, like especially Filipinos. Like Filipino families will always have like at least one gay family member.
Latin Americans, we have a lot of gay family members,
right?
Yeah.
And it's crazy to me how they still shame like their kids for like liking penis or liking vagina. When it's just like, it's just.
Why you gotta say it like that? No, but again, because the reason I wanted to bring that up, because like, again, like, as people of color, Melon, like, again, fucking, like, what is the morally correct word that we were taught that was morally correct depending on the society? we see our family members. We probably had probably that uncle we don't like, or that that family member we just don't like because of the way they think.
The way they think, yeah.
But also like it's also good to remember that like they were molded, and like ask yourself how much agency do they have, and how much agency that you have, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, some people do have choice. Like for example, if I want to put my hand on my face, like I can just do that. Like that's something like I'm allowed to do. But like understand that like the only reason I can do stuff like make good decisions because I actually had the privilege to make good decisions, right? Yeah. If everyone in the whole planet thought that like I don't know, like for example, my whole entire friend group did not like black people, right? I probably could have been racist. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where it's like, but then again, like I could have met someone else that would have taught me differently. Right? Yeah. So like you're definitely molded by the society you are, just remembering that like, like you don't have to forgive someone, you don't have to accept their behavior, but also understand like, hey, like maybe that's the reason why they're, a shit person. Like
And it's always it's hard when, older generations like they don't realize that their way of thinking is kind of like unacceptable. But and it's sometimes you just have to accept that like they're not going to change their ways, or like it's always going to be hard to explain to them. I think the most important thing though is like within our generation, or within like your own family, like within your like whether it be your siblings or your cousins, like make sure that way of thinking is kind of like is not passed down, I guess, like or make sure that they're not inheriting their parents' way of thinking without critically thinking it. Like for example, like, oh, your cousin, like, oh, your parents don't like gay people and you don't like gay people. Why? Because it's harder. It's going to be harder for a younger person growing up in the generation and our like societal norms to answer that question and like defend their parents kind of like their view versus like, oh yeah, it's just like what my parents like think, so I'm gonna think like that's not acceptable.
And I think that's why I'm a big advocate for like challenging your parents. Like we could make fun of all the white kids that they like I'm not listening to you, Stephanie. Like they call their mom by the first name. But at the same time, when I enter a white dynamic household, one of the things I do appreciate is like, you know what, like I'm glad that you're still able to like challenge your parents. And I'm not encouraging people who are immigrants or minorities or people of color, whatever you want to use, to pick up fights with their parents, but understanding that like if you can't change your parents, at least you can change like the future.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just so that we can live in a better society. Because like sure, it's not your job, and like you don't have to reparent someone, but like like for example, I wanted to bring up like Aboriginal philosophy where like if a child was born, it wasn't the job of the mom and dad to raise them. It was the job of the whole community to
nurture them.
Because like a lot of times you say like, oh, it's not our job. Like for example, when it comes to like, and I'm talking about like men's mental health, where it's like, I know a lot of women says like it's not my job to fix a man, which is true. Like I think we're hard on our women, like expecting them to fix men, which is like unfair. But at the same time, that men is also gonna go to another part of a group of men and then like, nah, I'm not his mama. Like fuck this guy, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's definitely not our job to fix someone, but like if you have the capacity to give them perspective and some tools to help them have a chance of redemption, like would you?
Yeah.
Because like that was something I kind of was thinking about, because like and maybe I'm just like revoking what I said in the past, like in terms of like in the beginning episodes where it's like, I think not your job, and you don't want anyone think it's a good philosophy to adopt if you're someone who's super empathetic and someone who's taking on more than you can handle, because you also have needs as well. But also understanding that like, hey, like some people go through shit that makes them a bad person. Yeah. This is a hard conversation to talk about mental health, because everyone's like, oh, stop the stigma with mental health. But then when someone shows shitty behavior, we're like, we tend to point fingers like that's a bad person, right? Of course, whether that person has a chance of redemption or not is up to society or what you believe in. But I just encourage you that if maybe we don't have to ask that question in the first place, like maybe we could give someone a better future. But because even though we are molded and socialized, we ourselves are also social forces that can influence people around us. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's like kind of just the power perspective of like, hey, like it might not be your job, but also like you have the capacity to help someone. So like that's kind of what I just want to talk about, because like we are like talking about men's mental health, and when it comes to intergenerational trauma, like you have a lot more power than you think you do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But, anything else you guys want to add?
No, I think you touched like a lot of the bases.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for watching Daddy Issues the episode.
Yeah. Thank you for watching Mommy and Daddy Issues Part 17.
Uncle issues.
Yeah.
Or
Auntie
stepbro issues.
Stepbro issues.
Yeah. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for tuning in. Let us know in the comments like what kind of behaviors you're trying to police in yourself, and what other like type of characteristics you're trying to police in your family, and like what how you're trying to stop the cycle of intergenerational trauma, and like, you know,
And what kind of world do you want to live in the
Yeah.
future? You know,
Yeah,
what kind of world do you
yeah.
want your kids, if you plan on having kids, live in the
Right.
future?
Yeah.
And thank you to all the people who responded to our Instagram question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate you guys'
Okay.
input.
Appreciate you guys. Hope you guys are
Peace.
staying healthy. We love you, and stay happy, healthy, and live, laugh, love.
Live, laugh, love.
All right.
See you guys in the next one.
See you.
Bye.